Welcome to the second episode of the Verhaert Podcast. I'm David from Strategic Innovation, and I have the honor to interview Axel Funhoff, the General Director of Verhaert Masters in Innovation. So I'm happy to be here, and there is something that I would like to discuss with you, of course, about innovation. That's why we are sitting here. I'm an Italy lover, and I was in Italy on vacation a month ago, and I heard people talking about Super Mario, and then it's not the video game for sure. It's their nickname for Mario Draghi, and I remember that Mario Draghi, the former head of the European Commission and also European Central Bank, published a kind of big report announcing that Europe is lagging behind in innovation. Now, an interesting insight is that, he also mentions that we're not lagging in having good ideas, but in the ability to scale the ideas commercially. And I think that's rather interesting to me. And what's your opinion on that?
Very interesting, and thanks for having me. Mario Draghi published his report nearly exactly a year ago in September 2024. And it's a very, very large report with lots of policy recommendations, but also really with a claim that Europe needs to step up its innovation game and really invest 750 to 800 billion euros systematically every year in order to really catch up with the Americans and also the Chinese in terms of being innovative. So I think that he touched a very, very sensitive spot in Europe. He was right. You can also really see that Europe indeed has good ideas and so on. But you can also really see that in many, many sectors, probably in most sectors, America has out-innovated and outgrown Europe to some extent. So you can really see when you just take sectors out and you just compare direct peers with each other, that the European companies are often not so different in size, but usually they are very different in margin and they are very, very different in valuation. So I'll just give you one example, if you like. Take two direct peers, Caterpillar from the US, and compare it to Volvo trucks, Volvo in Europe. Now, Volvo is only about 20% smaller than Caterpillar, but Caterpillar is about 3.5 times more valuable than Volvo. And why is that? Well, the reason is that Caterpillar really has systematically higher margins. Even though it does not spend more on R&D than Volvo, actually quite the opposite. Volvo has spent more on R&D than Caterpillar. But the innovation game the two companies have played is actually very, very different. So you can see that Caterpillar has very, very systematically invested into a new technology that very much addressed customer value. In fact, it addressed the total cost of ownership, the total cost of operations of its earth-moving machines, excavators, and so forth, while Volvo has very much focused on the electric transition, so going from combustion engines to electrical engines. Both are absolutely valid innovation movements, no doubt about it. We are certainly not against green and renewable energy. But you can actually really see that when you enable through a digital suite, as Caterpillar has done, one operator to operate different vehicles at the same time, even remotely from a very, very large distance, then it's clear that you're really addressing the topic of productivity, of costs, operating costs, and so forth, where really Caterpillar has moved ahead through its innovation. As a result, its margin is also much, much higher. It's actually 20% versus 12% for Volvo. And again, its valuation is 3.5 times higher than that of Volvo. And that's a relatively representative picture if you look across other sectors as well.
But that's interesting. What you say is indeed that there is a relation between the margin and then, of course, we create a margin with the right, with the effective innovation. In your example, it's clear that besides the sustainability, the electrification, you're also looking for a new sweet spot, which is a new value proposition, which gives them a higher margin. But then you mentioned that this results in a higher company value.
Yes. Exactly. So, and that is really something that I think we should address more systematically in Europe. Also, we as Verhaert towards our clients. If you just run a plain vanilla financial model, discounted cash flow model, for example, and you compare and you put in the numbers of a general industrial company, such as Caterpillar, such as ABB, Siemens, whatever, and you raise the margin, the EBIT margin, by 1 percentage point. So, for example, if a company would be generating an EBIT margin of 6 rather than 5% or 11 rather than 10%, the company value moves up by 12%. If you manage to grow by 1% faster, so 6% instead of 5%, the value of that company would grow by 8%. So if you really systematically invest into innovation that promises to increase the customer value, through which you can raise your prices, through which you can raise your margins, then suddenly your valuation rises disproportionately faster than the rest. And that is really what we can see in the US versus Europe across many, many sectors.
But that's indeed one of the arguments that we can also use for our clients, that they can convince their board in a way. But if we think about, you talk about innovation, you have innovation. Eh? So some people say, okay, that's typical, it's or disruptive or incremental or, the different types. What kind of innovation are we then talking about to really have this impact?
Let's really differentiate. Incremental innovation is really the innovation in small steps, so making an existing product ever a little bit better. And then you would have disruptive information on the other hand, on the other side of the spectrum, which would really mean you disrupt an existing market, you hurt the incumbent players because you have something significantly better. Uber is disruptive. WhatsApp is disruptive for telecommunication companies. Those are real disruptive business models. Somewhere in between, you have transformational innovation, leapfrog innovation. So that is really something, leapfrog innovation is maybe not the official name, but I would really think that Europe needs more transformational innovation in terms of really thinking about a new product line, a new value proposition, a new go-to-market strategy that really has an impact on its margins altogether. And that is really, I think, something that Europe has missed in the past. Very often, innovation in Europe in the past, say 20, 25, maybe even more years, was driven by maybe a political agenda, by subsidization opportunities and so forth. Of course, also the green transition, and I don't want to put this into any doubt. Of course, it's very, very important that we move along this green transition and become much more renewable and eco-friendly and climate protective in the future, no doubt about that. But I think what European companies have to really learn is that there may be ideas that maybe come from other sectors that could be very, very well relevant for them, that could really establish a new product line, a new product offering, a new value proposition with substantially higher margins that would really also enable European valuation to really go up systematically. And I think that's really the game that European companies should really play into the next innovation cycle.
Yeah. That's very interesting. We discussed that indeed we should invest more. We should do the right type of innovation to have more substantial effect on margin and therefore also on the company value in the end. There is also the how. How could we implement innovation? How should we execute it? we're an innovation consultancy company. That means that we are, good in helping companies with their innovation. What's the advantage of, external versus internal innovation? How do you see that kind of an optimal way?
Very, very good question. I think that companies like ours, we are really specialized in innovating and developing within the context of projects, within the context of budgets, predetermined or very well estimated time and cost budgets. That's really our core competency. And the other core competency that we bring to the table compared to maybe in-house innovation is that we can learn from all kinds of sectors and apply the knowledge of other sectors to different sectors. So I really think that we can help companies, our clients, to really accelerate from 0 to 1. And then at the end of the day, companies can take this over and make it their in-house product, make it their core competency and so forth. But my experience very clearly is that our sector has a tremendous value add when it comes to new innovation, to new developments from 0 to 1. And I also really think that it is not to be underestimated how much read across you have amongst the different sectors. When you are in the fast-moving consumer goods sector, for example, you may not have, the electronic sector on your screen. Yeah. Nevertheless, we can apply knowledge and we can apply business models from one sector to the other, and I think it's. It would be really interesting to have a more inspirational preparations for innovation going forward. There's another one that I would like to mention. When you look at the traditional innovation path and the time to market between an idea or a decision and the time to market, plenty of time is lost in the transaction, in the preparation, in the contract negotiations and so forth. Plenty of time may also be lost by not really applying new and modern technology. So, for example, do not underestimate how much AI-enabled innovation platforms can really help you to accelerate to the market. So, for example, Procter & Gamble has really demonstrated that relatively early in the process, and this is also public knowledge. Procter & Gamble has teamed up with Harvard to develop an AI-powered innovation suite from which, with the help of AI, Procter & Gamble could come to the market with new formulas, new compositions of their products, and so basically, if you're a fast-moving consumer good, you may think that AI is difficult to apply, but then you just open it up and see what's possible. And I think that we can offer a great deal of inspiration there.
Because what they do with the AI approach is basically be faster to accelerate their innovation.
Yeah, make less mistakes,
exactly.
have maybe synthetic iterations, synthetic validations, anything that we also have in-house. But I really think that is something that has really made a difference. Between Procter, 25% EBIT margin versus its European peers, significantly less than that. And of course, it's also reflected in the valuation.
Yeah. Okay, that's cool. Are there any other things that we can, use or insights or some ways that we can use from the US? Because of course the US and Europe, it's not the same. We have other conditions. Situation is totally different. But as you started in mentioning that their investments are significantly different, higher, can we use some of their methods or recipes in Europe? Is there something that we can learn from them?
I think so. I mean, there are always two spectrums that we can discuss. On the one hand, there is policy advice. I think that Europe can significantly improve its policy to enable maybe more market oriented innovation. That's one thing. We have very limited influence on that. On the other hand, there is what companies can really do. And I think that what I observe is that US companies were very systematically maybe more ambitious than European companies. Maybe European companies were more directed by political agendas, maybe. But clearly, when you start innovating, when you as the board or as the executive management decide that we need a new product line, we need a product platform with new value propositions and so forth, that on itself is a very ambitious proposition to start with, which I observe the Americans really had that quite systematically, even in relatively classical industries, while Europeans have tended to innovate more incrementally within existing product lines, and then of course also again into more the energy transition and so forth. All fine, but I think that Europe really should become more ambitious. And now where we see that global supply chains are really disrupted, and the global situation, the economic situation, is systematically disrupted by tariffs and other interruptions, policy-induced interruptions. I think that we in Europe really have to understand this wake-up call. We have to understand that we cannot freely source elsewhere necessarily, because those lines may not be reliable in the future anymore. They are certainly not reliable anymore between us and the US, and of course there is an implication for China as well. And we never know how the Asian room may destabilize and so forth. So I really would like to urge European decision makers to really think in terms of like, how do we stabilize our economy from near-sourced options and supply chain opportunities.
Yeah, that's a kind of high-level view. And then I see in front of me also two Axels. Axel as a professor, and also we have Axel as a general director, which brings us a bit more close to what we are doing.
Yeah.
How could we convince our clients? What are the arguments? What is kind of, the reasoning behind investing more in innovation? How could we give them the arguments to convince their internal management or board?
We can see clearly that it pays off. Of course, it pays off. Yeah. So cutting-edge industrial companies usually spend, let's say, 8% or so of their revenues recurring and rolling and constant into R&D, and that's good. That's a good benchmark number. That's about representative for the industrial sector as a whole in the broadest sense. Now we have plenty of examples where we can show that we have enabled the same sort of commercial impact with less R&D budget. So if you think 8%, that means that the average industrial company spends €1 and generates 12 euros revenues from it over time. I'm really convinced that companies like ours can do this faster, more to the point, more relevant. We may have more relevant read across from other sectors. We can combine more knowledge from other sectors and package it into new opportunities. And I really think that could very well enhance the R&D success. This is something that I've said before as well. I also really believe that companies that do lots of research and development should really think in terms of platform-enabled R&D going forward, innovation going forward. Platform-enabled really means also maybe AI-powered. It means smaller iterations and so forth. And I'm convinced we can help and really make a tremendous impact for our clients.
And that's all about doing it faster, better, more effective, accelerating it with the idea that when accelerating innovation, you can validate faster. You said already, like, okay, if you grow faster, that has a significant impact or effect in the company value.
Mm-hmm.
You also said, okay, it's about, the budget,
Mm-hmm.
which is then significantly different in the US.
Yeah.
Is there anything that we can also use as arguments for our clients to say, board, you need to invest more in innovation?
Well, yeah, I mean, on the one hand, we can show that innovation pays off. We can also show what kind of innovation pays off. So when we make complete case studies and where we compare the Procter & Gamble's versus the Unilevers, or we compare the Caterpillars versus the Volvos of this world, and in other sectors as well. So we can see from case studies what other companies have really done very well to move ahead competition. That's really one thing. In Europe, we can see that altogether we have a corporate R&D budget of about $500 billion. The US has about $800 billion. There's also a statistic published by Eurostat that shows that the European R&D spending does not translate so much into productivity increases as China, as China and the US. So we are lagging China and the US in terms of turning R&D dollars into productivity increases. So certainly there is more to do. But we also should never forget that the geostrategic situation is very different from 2 or 3 years ago. Yeah. We need to make sure that we can source critical components from Europe because we can no longer rely on overseas supply chains. So we really need to make sure that is within our reach. And that is, of course, a call to policymakers, but it's also a call to executives. Yeah. Who really cannot, there is no excuse if you cannot deliver because you miss critical components. Yeah.
All right, Axel. Then I have one last question for you. What would be your key recommendation? A kind of a one-liner that you would use or give us as a key takeaway.
I think that in Europe, we have to get the message that the world is changed for us. The world is not as safe anymore for us as it was before. And so let me maybe get back to the start of our conversation where you spoke about Mario Draghi.
Super Mario.
And Mario Draghi, when he was head of the European Central Bank, he was very famous with one sentence that saved the euro.
Yeah.
And he basically said, we will do whatever it takes to preserve the euro. And I think that now is the time for European corporates to do really whatever it takes to close the innovation gap to the US and China.
I think that's a strong one to conclude. So this is the message then to policymakers, executives, boards, innovation managers, product managers, whatever it takes. Thanks a lot for joining this podcast.
Thank you very much, David.